Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that the people around you have stopped questioning anything. The world has become so noisy, so fast-paced, and so overwhelmed with information that the human mind, once built for curiosity, reflection, and independent thought, has slowly drifted into passive acceptance. Think about what that really means. What happens to a society when critical thinking begins to disappear, when the ability to reason, question, and reflect is replaced by instant reactions, shallow opinions, and endless echo chambers? In this video, we're going to uncover the unsettling truth behind the decline of critical thinking and the alarming rise of what many philosophers now describe as collective stupidity. It's a phenomenon where countless people adopt superficial thinking, accept narratives without question, and surrender their intellectual independence without even realizing it. And by the end of this journey, we'll uncover the most important and urgent truth of all, one that could determine whether we reclaim our ability to think or slowly lose it to a system designed to keep us comfortably numb. Before we go any further, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. What you're about to hear may challenge your perspective and even shake the foundation of how you see the world. Share this video with those who still dare to question and who believe that truth is always worth pursuing. Let's begin with an uncomfortable reality. Thinking is difficult, and in today's world, it's often discouraged. Modern society doesn't reward deep contemplation. It rewards speed, emotional reactions, and conformity. And this didn't happen by accident. From algorithms that constantly feed us what we already want to hear, to education systems that value memorization over exploration, the world around us is steadily conditioning us away from genuine critical thinking. Noam Chomsky warned us about this decades ago through his work on media and propaganda. He argued that systems of power rely on what he called the manufacturing of consent. In simple terms, when people are trained to consume information without questioning it and to agree without truly understanding it, they become easier to influence and even easier to deceive. Critical thinking, once considered one of humanity's greatest strengths, is now treated as an inconvenience. It interrupts outrage culture, slows down online arguments, challenges popular narratives, and dares to ask a dangerous question. But is this actually true? And in a culture obsessed with always being right, simply asking that question can make you seem like the problem. So how did we end up here? The answer goes much deeper than most people realize. One of the biggest reasons is the overwhelming amount of information we absorb every single day. According to neuroscientist Daniel Levitin, the average person now processes nearly 5 times more information each day than people did only a few decades ago. Notifications, messages, breaking news, opinions, advertisements, and endless updates compete for our attention from the moment we wake up. The human brain was never designed to handle this constant stream of information. When it becomes overloaded, it starts taking shortcuts. Instead of carefully evaluating ideas, it relies on mental habits, cognitive biases, and group thinking to make sense of complexity. Rather than thinking independently, it looks for signals from others, friends, influencers, experts, or anyone perceived as an authority. Psychologists call this social proof. While it's a natural survival mechanism, it's also incredibly easy to manipulate. Think about how often you've seen a post with thousands of likes and comments and immediately assumed it must be true or important. That isn't reason speaking. It's a psychological shortcut. And it's one of the biggest reasons collective stupidity spreads so easily. Not because people lack intelligence, but because they're being conditioned to follow signals instead of evidence. Another troubling trend is the decline of reading, especially deep reading. Neuroscientist Marianne Wolf explains that digital media is reshaping the way our brains process information. We skim instead of reading carefully. We jump from one tab to another. We struggle to stay focused on longer pieces of writing. The problem is that critical thinking depends on sustained attention. You cannot properly analyze, reflect, or truly understand an idea if your focus is constantly being interrupted. Ask yourself this: When was the last time you read an entire article without reaching for your phone? When was the last time you paused after hearing something controversial instead of reacting immediately? These simple habits, once completely normal, are quietly disappearing. Carl Sagan, one of the greatest scientific minds of the 20th century, once warned that we live in a society deeply dependent on science and technology, while very few people truly understand either. His concern wasn't simply ignorance. It was the gradual loss of our ability to think critically about the very systems our lives depend on. Today, in a world overflowing with opinions, hot takes, and ideological conflict, one of the greatest acts of rebellion is simply learning to think clearly. But the problem isn't only technological or educational, it's emotional. Critical thinking is uncomfortable. It forces us to admit that we don't know everything. It challenges our ego and pushes us into cognitive dissonance, where our deepest beliefs collide with uncomfortable evidence. And in a culture that celebrates certainty, confidence, and identity above almost everything else, that discomfort becomes difficult to tolerate. So instead of thinking, we defend. Instead of questioning, we retreat into our tribes. We repeat slogans, cancel opposing voices, avoid difficult conversations, and memorize talking points instead of engaging in genuine dialogue. The kind of honest Socratic discussion that has driven philosophy forward for centuries. What we're witnessing is more than a decline in critical thinking. It's a steady shift toward intellectual laziness. And the consequences are devastating. Because when people stop thinking, they stop questioning. And when people stop questioning, they become vulnerable to manipulation, propaganda, and fear. Which leaves us with one unavoidable question: who truly benefits when people no longer think for themselves? Stay with me, because what comes next will reveal how deeply these forces have woven themselves into our everyday lives, and why reclaiming the ability to think is no longer just a personal challenge. It's a moral responsibility. To truly understand the roots of this collective decline, we have to look beneath the surface and examine how many of our systems have gradually evolved, not to cultivate independent thought, but to suppress it. Let's begin with the education system. John Taylor Gatto, an award-winning teacher and one of the strongest critics of traditional schooling, argued that modern education was never designed to produce independent thinkers. In his own words, the truth is that schools don't really teach anything except how to obey orders. Gatto believed that compulsory education was created during the industrial age, not to cultivate enlightened minds, but to prepare people for factory life, predictable, obedient, and compliant. Think about that. Instead of teaching us how to think, we're taught what to think. From an early age, children are judged not by the originality or depth of their ideas, but by how well they memorize information and repeat it back. Conformity is rewarded. Curiosity is often treated as a distraction. And over time, the lesson becomes clear. Follow the rules, stay inside the lines, and don't ask too many questions. Unfortunately, that pattern doesn't end when school does. It only grows stronger in adulthood. At work, in the media, and even within our friendships, we quickly learn that questioning the majority, challenging accepted ideas, or expressing unpopular opinions often comes with consequences. The fear of social rejection, of being labeled difficult or controversial, is enough to silence even our deepest doubts. So we remain silent, and silence, when practiced long enough, becomes complicity. Psychologist Erich Fromm explored this idea. In Escape from Freedom, he argued that many people secretly choose to surrender their freedom of thought, because genuine freedom also demands responsibility, and responsibility can be frightening. Thinking for yourself means you can no longer blame others for your ignorance. You can no longer hide behind the crowd. You must confront uncertainty on your own. For many people, that burden feels too heavy, so instead, we choose comfort, we choose distraction, we choose simplicity instead of complexity, and in doing so, we become easier to control. Social media has pushed this problem to a level few could have imagined. What once promised global connection has become a battlefield of endless opinions, outrage cycles, and algorithmic manipulation. Every platform is built to keep you scrolling, reacting, and consuming, not thinking. You're constantly guided toward content that reinforces your existing beliefs. You're encouraged to respond instantly, emotionally, and often with anger. These platforms reward engagement, not truth. They thrive on division, not understanding, and somewhere beneath all that noise, the voice of reason slowly disappears. Why spend time reflecting when reacting is faster and earns more attention? Marshall McLuhan predicted this decades ago. Back in the 1960s, he warned that the medium is the message, meaning that the way information is delivered changes the way we think. Today's media rewards speed over depth, outrage over nuance, and certainty over humility. Even truth itself has become distorted. In an age flooded with misinformation, what is true often matters less than what becomes viral. People no longer judge ideas by evidence or logic. They judge them by how many others already believe them. This is the tyranny of the majority in one of its most dangerous forms. Not political, cognitive. So where do we go from here? We begin by asking better questions, questions that challenge the status quo, questions that demand real answers, instead of slogans or statistics, stripped of context. What are you being told to believe is? Who benefits if you believe it? What assumptions are hidden beneath your certainty? How often do you intentionally seek out opposing viewpoints, not to defeat them, but to understand them? These questions aren't comfortable, but they are essential, because the cure for collective stupidity isn't intelligence alone. It's courage. The courage to be wrong. The courage to learn. The courage to admit you don't know, and to pursue the truth anyway. Socrates, one of history's earliest defenders of critical thinking, famously said, "The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing." That wasn't an act of self-deprecation. It was an invitation to remain curious, to keep asking questions, and to stay intellectually humble in the face of a vast and mysterious world. Today, however, humility has become increasingly rare. Certainty is celebrated. Arrogance is mistaken for wisdom. Everyone wants to share an opinion. Very few want to seek understanding. Everyone wants to speak. Very few are willing to listen. The irony is that genuine thinkers are often quiet, observant, and reserved. They understand that wisdom doesn't grow from noise. It grows from silence, reflection, and the willingness to wrestle with complexity. Perhaps that's why critical thinkers are so often ignored. In a culture obsessed with speed and spectacle, the slow work of thinking rarely gets rewarded. But abandoning it comes with a cost. Because the moment you surrender your ability to think for yourself, you surrender your freedom. You become a puppet whose strings are pulled by forces you never notice. And those forces aren't imaginary. They are economic. They are the companies that profit from your addiction to endless content. The politicians who depend on emotional reactions instead of thoughtful reflection. The institutions that survive because people stop asking questions. But the moment you reclaim your mind, everything begins to change. You become far more difficult to manipulate. You begin seeing through the illusion. You stop passively consuming ideas and start actively searching for truth. And through that simple act, you ignite something powerful. The same fire that has driven philosophers, scientists, revolutionaries, and truth seekers throughout history. People who refuse to stop thinking. So now the question becomes this: will you do the same? Stay with me, because in the next section, we'll go even deeper into the psychology behind collective thinking. You'll discover why even highly intelligent people fall into these traps, and how the human mind can be convinced to believe what feels true instead of what actually is. We're not finished yet. In fact, the most important revelation is still ahead. To truly understand the rise of collective stupidity, we have to examine the battlefield inside the human mind. despite how much we trust logic, the reality is that the brain is far more emotional than rational. We like to believe our decisions are based on facts. The truth is much more complicated. In his groundbreaking book, Thinking Fast and Slow, Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman explained that the brain operates through two different systems. One is fast, automatic, and emotional. The other is slow, deliberate, and analytical. The fast system jumps to conclusions, makes instant judgments, and conserves mental energy. The slow system questions, analyzes, and thinks carefully, but it also demands effort. And that's where the problem begins. In a world that never slows down, most people remain trapped in fast mode. There is rarely enough time or willingness to pause and think deeply. Instead, we depend on heuristics, stereotypes, and mental shortcuts that feel right, even when they're completely wrong. That creates the perfect environment for mass manipulation. Politicians, marketers, and media organizations all understand how easily these mental shortcuts can be exploited. They reduce complicated issues into simple choices. They use emotionally charged language to bypass rational thought. They repeat the same narratives until familiarity begins to feel like truth, not because we've verified those ideas, but because we've heard them enough times to believe them. And once a belief takes hold, the brain begins defending it regardless of the evidence. This is known as confirmation bias, and it's one of the most powerful cognitive traps the human mind can fall into. So take a moment and reflect. How often do you actively search for evidence that challenges your own beliefs? How often do you genuinely listen to an opposing viewpoint instead of mentally preparing your response? If you're honest with yourself, probably not as often as you'd like to believe. That's not because something is wrong with you. It's simply part of human nature. The problem begins when we stop recognizing that tendency. Another important concept is groupthink, a psychological phenomenon where the desire for harmony or agreement within a group leads people to make irrational or deeply flawed decisions. It has appeared throughout history, from corporate failures to some of humanity's greatest tragedies. People suppress their doubts to preserve unity. They choose consensus instead of truth. Social psychologist Irving Janis, who introduced the term, discovered that even intelligent, well-meaning people can make disastrous decisions when they silence disagreement and avoid critical examination. Why does this happen? Because challenging the group feels dangerous. Going against the majority demands more than intelligence. It requires courage. It requires integrity. Yet history repeatedly shows that real progress has always come from those willing to think differently. Galileo, Darwin, Nietzsche, and Martin Luther King Jr. were all mocked, rejected, or attacked because of their ideas. Still, they continued to think. They continued to speak. And their willingness to challenge the collective ignorance of their time shaped the world we live in today. But don't mistake that path for an easy one. To think critically in a society that discourages doubt is an act of rebellion. You risk being misunderstood, isolated, and even hated. But in return, you gain something far more valuable: clarity, self-respect, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your beliefs truly belong to you, rather than being handed to you by someone else. Now let's make this personal. Why do so many people feel anxious, lost, or unfulfilled, even though we have access to more knowledge and technology than any generation before us? The answer isn't found in what we've gained. It's found in what we've lost. One of our greatest losses is the habit of inner dialogue, the ability to sit quietly with a question, explore it honestly, and allow truth to emerge through reflection. Instead, we've outsourced our thinking to machines, to the media, and to public opinion. But no algorithm can tell you what is true for your life. No trending topic can replace your inner voice, and no popular movement can substitute for the quiet certainty that comes from a deeply examined belief. So where do we begin? We begin by developing awareness. Awareness of our thinking habits. Awareness of the information we consume. Awareness of the difference between genuinely thinking and simply reacting. One of the most powerful ways to do this is through metacognition, the practice of thinking about your own thinking. Ask yourself this: what's influencing my opinion right now? Am I genuinely open to being wrong, or am I simply absorbing this idea without questioning it? Am I engaging with it thoughtfully, or just accepting it passively? Another powerful habit is practicing dialectical thinking, the ability to hold two opposing ideas in your mind while honestly exploring both. This isn't simply intellectual flexibility, it's mental strength. It allows you to move beyond black and white thinking, beyond us versus them, and into the place where genuine understanding begins. Philosopher Jiddu Krishnamurti once said, "To understand the immeasurable, the mind must be extraordinarily quiet." That kind of stillness is rare today, and yet it's exactly where wisdom begins to grow. But let's be honest, critical thinking isn't something you develop overnight. It's a discipline. It demands reading, not just headlines, but books, complete arguments, and ideas with depth and nuance. It requires listening, not only to the people who agree with you, but especially to those who don't. It requires humility, the kind that accepts uncertainty as part of the journey. Above all, it requires rejecting intellectual laziness. If something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. If everyone around you believes something without ever questioning it, that's your signal to pause, not to reject it automatically, but to investigate it honestly. In an age where ignorance is loud and confidence is often confused with competence, thinking deeply isn't just a personal virtue, it's a public responsibility. Because the future of any society depends not on the loudness of its opinions, but on the quality of its thinking. And meaningful change rarely begins with crowds. It begins with one person who chooses to think clearly in a world that doesn't. In the final part of this journey, we'll uncover the most important truth of all: the real reason critical thinking is disappearing, and what you can do not only to resist it, but to become a light for others. What you're about to hear may completely change the way you understand your mind, your relationships, and your place in shaping the world. At the center of this entire crisis, beneath the digital noise, the failing institutions, and the growing cultural division, lies something even more dangerous. The true reason critical thinking is fading isn't because people are incapable of it. It's because they're afraid of what it might uncover. To think critically is to risk everything that gives us psychological comfort: our identity, our beliefs, our community. And for many people, those things feel too valuable to question. We live in an era where identity has become sacred. People define themselves by their opinions, their affiliations, and their ideologies. Questioning an idea is now treated as a personal attack. But that is the very illusion that destroys genuine thought. We are not our ideas. You are not your political party. You are not your religion. You are not your social group. You are a human being with the ability to grow, to learn, and to change. And that growth begins the moment you separate your self-worth from your current beliefs. The final and most important truth is this: critical thinking is more than an intellectual ability. It's a spiritual act. It's choosing truth over comfort, growth over certainty, and freedom over approval. It's the quiet decision to keep your eyes open, even when the truth is uncomfortable. Because once you begin thinking critically, you start noticing the structures surrounding you, the systems of manipulation, the algorithms of control, and the masks people wear. It can feel overwhelming. It can even be painful, but it is real. And reality, no matter how uncomfortable it may be, is the only foundation upon which genuine freedom can be built. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." Yet confronting our inner world, our unconscious motives, inherited beliefs, and cognitive blind spots is the very essence of critical thinking. Critical thinking isn't only about questioning the world, it's about questioning yourself. Why do I believe what I believe? Where did this belief come from? What part of me is afraid to let it go? When you begin asking those questions honestly, an entirely new world opens before you. Not just a world of knowledge, a world of wisdom. And wisdom is exactly what our society is starving for. In a culture addicted to instant answers, wisdom encourages deeper questions. In a world filled with noise, wisdom chooses silence. In an age of mass conformity, wisdom has the courage to be free. This is your invitation, not simply to think, but to wake up. To stop living as a product of your environment and start becoming the architect of your own mind. Because no school, no institution, and no social media platform will ever do that for you. That responsibility belongs to you alone. And when you accept it, something remarkable begins to happen. You start seeing with greater clarity. You begin experiencing what it means to live in alignment with truth. Not borrowed truth, not popular truth, but truth you've earned for yourself. You begin recognizing when manipulation is being used against you. You learn to distinguish information from propaganda, education from indoctrination, and genuine connection from empty performance. Most importantly, you begin to lead, not with noise, not with ego, but with depth. You become a light in a dark room, a calm voice in the middle of outrage, a grounded thinker in a world driven by reaction. That is what the world needs now more than ever. Not louder voices, not sharper arguments, but deeper minds. Minds willing to embrace complexity. Minds willing to say, I don't know, but I'm willing to learn. Minds that no longer seek to win every debate, but instead seek to understand reality. If you truly want to change the world, begin by changing the way you think. Not because it's easy, not because it's popular, but because it's right. The rise of collective stupidity isn't the disease, it's the symptom. A symptom of fear, exhaustion, and a world too distracted to look inward. But every moment you choose to think clearly pushes back against that tide. Every time you pause instead of reacting. Every time you ask a question instead of assuming the answer. Every time you choose clarity over comfort, you reclaim a piece of your freedom. So as we bring this journey to a close, remember this. The most revolutionary thing you can do today isn't to shout. It isn't to conform. It isn't to repeat what everyone else is saying. It's to think. Let others drift through slogans and endless screens. Let them exchange their freedom for approval. But not you. You're awake now, and once you've awakened, there's no going back. If this message resonated with you, share it. Not because it's popular, but because it's necessary. Leave a comment with your thoughts, your questions, and your insights. Because critical thinking doesn't grow in silence. It grows through dialogue. And if you've stayed with me until now, remember this. You are not alone. A quiet revolution is already happening. Not a revolution of noise, but of minds. Not of outrage, but of awareness. And it begins every single time one person chooses to ask the harder question. Let that person be you. Stay curious. Stay awake. And above all, keep thinking. Thanks for watching.